Hey everyone, I'm Justin and this is Ripley, and we're here with another Vintage Vault. We got something really special for you today, but before we get into it, let's start off with the wrist check. Ripley, what do you got on today?
Well, we're talking about a sub, so I'm wearing my sub.
Very appropriate.
And it's the same reference, same year, but we'll get into all that later.
It'll be a good comparison.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm going with the Speedmaster, classic
Very nice.
moon watch.
Has light crystal?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect.
Good choice. Well, let's get into the watch. We have something really special for us today, right? So we have a Submariner, but it's not just any Submariner. It is the Comex sub.
Yeah, and I feel like we should almost preface this. Like, it is called Vintage Vault. This is now, just about now, it's an N Series 16610, so it is just about now getting to 30 years, so it's right on the cusp. But how often do we get a Comex? So
this one's kind of in that gray area. It's almost vintage, kind of vintage, depending on your standards. But with the Comex and, you know,
I'll allow it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna give it the pass. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it? Why don't you tell us about Comex if people don't know what Comex is?
Yeah, so I mean, Comex, it's a French deep sea diving company. Now they are more involved with, you know, like ESA, like European Space Agency, and robotics. But what, you know, they kind of cut their teeth doing subaquatic stuff and very much on a commercial diving, not recreational scuba diving. They were the ones working on, you know, mixed gas mixtures like heliox, underwater habitats, all of that stuff, and really, you know, progressed a lot of the hyperbaric.
Cutting edge stuff at the time, right? Really pushing the boundaries of technology.
A lot of work with hyperbaric chambers, and which is still a big part of what they do today. Anyway, in 1970 they formed a partnership with Rolex. They also had worked with Omega, but in 1970 they restarted their relationship with Rolex, and then that lasted all the way until 1997. During those years, the arrangement was that they'd supply Submariner and Sea Dweller watches to Comex, and their divers would use them kind of as a testing bed. They'd report back on performance and all of that. And
that's what we have here.
Yeah, things like the Sea Dweller's Helium Escape Valve was perfected with Comex. It was originally developed with the U.S. Navy and Sea Lab, but it was with the Comex divers where that design got further refined into what we have today.
And there's not very many of them, right? You talk about how many.
They were issuing them pretty much every sub and Sea Dweller reference between those years, but despite all those different references, there's really no more than a couple hundred of any one specific one. The 16610 is probably the most common by number, but even still we're talking about a handful of examples, 150 to 200 and so units.
A tiny amount of these watches out there.
Yeah, and on top of that, you know, these were dive watches and many were put in the hands of divers, so many did see underwater use or were damaged or weren't really purchased as a luxury item. It was, you know, a company given watch.
Which is part of the reason I think it's so cool and so desirable is it's what it was meant for, right? It was tested diving, and it was a really appropriate relationship, which
it was. And you have to figure, you know, Comex, a lot of deep commercial diving technology was built on technologies that Comex helped develop, and in that same way that they helped progress the diving industry, the Submariner and Rolex was doing a similar thing with the watches. So what a Comex sub sort of represents is this dual sort of partnership of these two brands with the mutual goal of, you know, furthering humans' ability to dive deeper, stay down longer, and you know, the watches are sort of these emblems of, you know, this long gone partnership, but really kind of important thing in the realm of the early days of scuba diving.
Very cool. So let's talk about this one. Let's talk about what makes this watch so special and a little bit of details about it.
Yeah, so what defines a Comex sub? It's a sub that was issued to Comex, but that can mean a lot of different things depending on the reference. Some of the old 5513s don't have the Comex name like this one anywhere on their dials, but they were retrofitted with Helium Escape Valves, well, you know, as a way to kind of refine and improve those designs. This one, as you can see, it's got the Comex name on it, and also turning it over, all Comex subs will have their individual, you know, Comex issue numbers engraved on their backs.
Gotcha.
So
it's kind of hard to miss, right? Between, I mean, you see the back, but also on the dial, it has the big white block negative space letter saying Comex right there on the bottom.
Exactly. For the 16610s, it's very consistent. For the 5513s, it can really depend on the specific watch. Some, unless you knew what to look for, you would, you know, or we're looking at the case back, you might miss it entirely. For one like this, all the 16610s will say Comex on their dials. They're going to have the case back engravings. Right. It's visually distinct. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think if you look at it just next to mine, which is granted in well-loved and worn condition here, you know, it's even from afar, you can kind of tell that the watches, the dial just looks a bit different. There's that white, a lot more white on the lower half. But beyond that, as far as capabilities, they're the exact same watch. And the reason for that was, by the time the 90s, you know, quartz watches aren't new. They're kind of the norm. Digital dive-specific things are now becoming, you know, not just prevalent, but it's kind of industry standard.
Right.
And so mechanical dive watches, let alone the Rolex watches, weren't really what they were in the 1970s.
Sure, there's less advancements being made, less tests being done, and less boundaries being pushed.
Yeah, and so in 1970, if a Comex diver got issued a watch, that was guaranteed to see serious underwater use, would likely be flooded a couple times, have parts replaced, and what have you. By the 1990s, like when this one would have come out, N series, so late 91, early 92 there, some of these saw diving use, others were given to, you know, high-level employees, celebratory commemorative watches. And so although there's a small number, you'll find a lot of them are in really, really good shape. And looking at this one compared to mine, granted, I don't baby my watches and it shows, but you can just tell how clean everything about, like, the bevels, the brushing.
I was going to comment. It looks beautiful. It looks.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, a lot of these watches saw hard life. You know, they were tested. They were, you know, in commercial diving situations, and they were meant to be pushed to their limits and you know, seeing how they perform. This one looks amazing. It looks like it's in fantastic shape. I wouldn't be surprised if it never saw the water. It may be one of those examples like you were talking about where, you know, it's more of, you know, either a gift or, you know, it has the branding and the Comex name, but it wasn't one of the pieces that was actually, you know, tested and pushed to the limits kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, just look at mine. Granted, marks, scratches, and everything else notwithstanding, even little things like both of these watches, N series again, so they still have their tritium dials and hands. But like my pearl's cracked. This one, I mean, it really looks it's not unworn, but this was not something that spent an afternoon even in the bottom of a diving bag.
Right.
So you know, I wouldn't be surprised if this was given to someone who already maybe had a diving watch and this was more of a, you know, dress piece for them, or you know, that commemorative piece from work that has a lot of sentimental value but isn't necessarily the thing they're wearing into the garden.
And that's part of what makes this watch so special. We see a lot of watches. We don't see very many of these. I mean, we've seen a couple of these Comexes, right? Like you said, there's a few hundred of each reference out there, and it's a rarity for us to see them. So and then to see one in such good shape it's just amazing. It's not something you see every day, every year, every several years.
Yeah, and I mean, and prices reflect that.
Of course.
Of all the Comex subs, probably the 16610 by production number alone would be the most common and affordable. But I'm using those words.
Very relative.
Relative in the realm of Comex subs.
Let's talk about price on these. We don't have to get specific. I mean, it's changing almost daily.
When I say the most affordable and the most common, yes, most common within the realm of like less than a few hundred total units ever made. And then by most affordable, price of entry about 6 figures. So
the 16610 is probably the most affordable Submariner.
And so
blanketing across Submariners, if you want a Submariner for the lowest point of entry, this model number is the one.
Yeah,
the one to get.
One like mine would be probably, and this is over
but the
10,
Comex
over
version,
10 times that.
Over 10 times. We're talking 6 figures.
Yeah. And it's also a really interesting one to collect because it's not just one reference. You can have a 16610 Comex sub, you can get a 5513, you can even hunt around for the Comex exclusive 5514, although you're not just paying 6 figures at that point, it'll be some multiple of 6 figures.
Yeah, they go up from there, right? Yeah.
But, you know, it's a fun if you're really into deep and looking for the most exclusive, most rare and premium Rolex Submariners out there, it's mil subs, Comex subs, and then pre-crown guard subs.
Yeah.
So, you know, it really is something special despite being just now about 30 years old and, you know, lacking the patina that you normally are looking for in a vintage watch. It's almost interesting on how little it has, where it's a really, really
it looks
clean
so
Comex
new. Like
sub.
you said, it's not unworn, but it's in amazing shape. It's, you know, it's definitely been taken care of, and, you know, it hasn't been abused. And, you know, there's something to be said for the watch that's, you know, gone through hell and back and still running and you know, still operating and working every single day. But there's something for the other side where it's lasted so long and it's in such amazing shape. And this isn't a young watch. This isn't something we've had it's been out for a few years. Like this watch has had a long life and it's still in such good condition. That's something great.
Yeah, it's been out in the wild for 30 years,
Yeah.
and it was in the hands of someone who at one point was doing some serious diving. Maybe not with this watch, but the fact that it didn't get destroyed
The fact that they got it, yes.
That just kind of puts into perspective. I can probably count on one hand the number of Comex subs of all references I've seen.
Yeah.
So it really is something that you don't see every day, and the relationship isn't at all still going. This ended in the late 90s, so I can only imagine these are just going to get harder to find.
It's not something they're making, they're continuing to make. It's not like, the new Hot Submariner or GMT or Sport Watch that there's the wait list for that, it's expensive, but you can get it. And these, however many is out there, they're out there, and that's it. And that's a really small number, which is part of the reason they're so expensive.
And I don't want, I'm a firm believer in wear your watches.
Sure.
As long as you're not going to damage them. I don't think you should swim in a Paul
Should
Newman.
be enjoyed.
Yeah, but if you want to wear a Comex sub, this is easily the most wearable reference. You don't have to worry. Just the cost of replacing an insert if God forbid something happened for this reference versus one of its plastic crystal predecessors, worlds apart. And so this has a 31-35 movement. This isn't an old watch per se. Yeah, it's right on the cusp of vintage, but if you want to wear a Comex as your daily, this one.
I love it. I would choose this, absolutely. I also like that it's kind of a sleeper, right? It looks like a 166110 Submariner, and unless you're really in the watch world or you're really in the know, you see the Comex on the dial and you notice that it's different, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot to you. It's not, unless you really understand what it is, till you realize how special the watch is.
Sleepers, I think a good word. It's literally the most rare and special version of the most common Submariner.
Yes,
So at a glance, it looks like almost the one looks like the one I own.
Sure,
but those who know Comex, those who know Rolex, it's those little kind of inside baseball things where you see the guy wearing it, and it's that's something special. And I think we're going to talk about it for a second.
Most people miss that, but yeah, you get it.
Now, would you rather have this or a mil sub?
Personally, I think I go with the mil sub, just because that's kind of been, since I've been into watches, that's been one of my grails. It's such an amazing piece. But this is it's a tough fight. The Comex it's the sub, the private label sub, I guess, right?
Yeah, I'm torn. For me, the mil sub, if you get one in its full mil spec configuration, is more visually distinct and special. But from a importance, historical significance, I have a really hard time looking past just the awesome Comex Rolex relationship and how there's such a finite number of these watches. There's not going to be any more, and it's an emblematic of a long gone era.
Yeah.
Saturation diving isn't using mechanical watches anymore as their primary timekeeping devices, and the military's not using. They're using digital devices as well, G-Shocks, what have you. And so in terms of their actual practical applications, it's really choose which bygone era you want to represent the most. And God, I love the Rolex Comex one. It's a hard call. I'd flip a coin and see how I felt after, maybe.
It's one of those that happens so often where you really can't make a wrong choice. They're both great. I'd be happy with either of them.
Well, it's not your everyday. This is probably one of the newest six-figure subs out there. You know what I mean?
Right.
When you hear of subs breaking the six-figure mark, it's usually some really old, rare, vintage, military issued, something like that. As far as six-figure subs, this is probably the most modern one out there.
I would agree.
And it's also so interesting that it's the least, auspicious looking. It looks like the sub that people have been seeing for decades.
Yeah, which I think makes it, it makes it kind of that much more desirable. Like we said, it's a little bit of that sleeper, that sleeper collector's watch.
Yeah, those who know, and those who don't won't mug you for it.
Absolutely. Well, this is no doubt a very special watch, and you know what we think, but we want to know what you think. So leave us a comment down below. Tell us what you think about the Comex, or if there's any other vintages that you'd like to see on the vault, leave us a comment below and let us know those too. Until next time, I'm Justin. This is Ripley. Take care.